I had a summer job when I was a 15-year-old girl that was a few miles from my house. I lived in a rural wooded area and my parents never let me go into the woods by myself, but they worked days and my job started at noon every day, so I had to walk to work. I chose to disobey them and walk through the woods, instead of on the road, to work because it cut about a mile off of my walk. So every day, at the same time, I'd walk through the very much abandoned state forest down a deer path for a mile or so until it intercepted a railroad track. Then I'd walk a couple more miles down the railroad tracks into town to my job. Stupid, I know, but I was 15. Taking this path always freaked me out and I always felt like I was being watched, but it was shorter and less sunny and less hot, and so I ignored my instincts, thinking my parents' influence was just making me paranoid. My parents would pick me up after my shift, unaware of my daily routine. This continued for weeks. One day, I'm walking, about a mile from any houses, deep in the woods, and there are 2 porn magazine pages that had been ripped out and placed on the trail facing me. They hadn't been there the day before. I was completely creeped out as they were clearly intentionally placed, and probably for me, since very few people utilize this area. But I kept walking because if I turned around at this point I'd have further to go to get out of the woods, and then there was a huge hill to climb to get back to my house, and no one would be around there to help me anyway. This was a densely wooded area with brambles and dogwood and rolling hills, so I couldn't see very far in any direction. Suddenly I could hear someone else walking close by. I stopped and I would hear them for a split second, and then they would stop. They sounded like they had change in their pocket, so I knew it wasn't an animal, but because of the echo I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Just to check that I wasn't crazy, I stopped once more and heard the same noise, which quickly stopped when I stopped. That's when I knew I was being stalked. My heart was racing with fear and my vision went blurry, but my instincts told me not to speak and not to run, but just keep walking down the dense deer path further into the woods. My gut told me not to look behind me. I could sense there was someone right behind me on the deer path now, but I did not look back. Now I'm a rather short, slightly chubby person, always have been, and looking at me you'd probably assume that I couldn't run very fast, so if you wanted to catch me deep in the woods you might assume you had plenty of time to do so. And looking back I think that is exactly what this creep was thinking. But back then I ran cross-country and track and could run a 7-minute mile, and hills were my specialty. I always placed really well on hilly terrain. By no means was I a great runner, but certainly I was likely faster than whatever pedo creep was hanging out in the woods stalking a little girl. It's not that I was processing this thought at the time, I just instinctually knew not to run, yet. I kept walking seemingly deeper into the woods because I knew the train track was up ahead where there would be more space to run without tripping or getting caught in the tree branches. It was terrifying to not look back, but something told me not to. While I walked I felt like my entire body was shutting down. It's a feeling I've never felt before or after that day. It was the feeling of being prey. Everything went blurry and I could feel blood pulsing in my ears and my heart was pounding. I just kept walking like nothing was happening and did not turn around, but I could feel someone maybe 5 or 10 feet behind me at this point following me for a good 1/8 of a mile. I didn't turn around. I didn't scream because I knew no one would hear me. As soon as I got nearer the train tracks, which were elevated along a man-made gravel mound, I ran. And then I ran on all fours up the hill, gripping onto weeds to pull myself up faster, and then I sprinted along the tracks as fast as my lungs and legs could carry me. I heard and saw branches snapping below me in the woods, but now I was out in the sun and the woods were dark, so I couldn't see what was behind the branches. I just kept sprinting. I never even saw the person, but I knew their intentions were awful. I never cut through the woods again, and I didn't mention what happened to my parents until I was 18 and had moved out of the house. I was too afraid of being grounded. Hardly anyone knows it, but Windfall, Indiana exists. It exists in such a way that when you're there you feel like you're in a completely separate world. No shops, no restaurants, no anything. Just a gas station, a bar, a post office, and some dirt roads. It has an energy to it. Like you can feel a thickness in the air that offsets your intuition. It makes a human being's natural senses spike, like an animal who knows a predator is nearby. At least, that's how I personally feel about it. The entire place is off-putting. The people aren't much better either. I was only 13 when we moved there. My older sister was 16 and my younger one was 12. Both of them did considerably better than I did, socially, at school, and I was often left by myself at our new home. Mom was working quite a bit and often stayed after hours. She said it was because we needed the money, and I'm positive we did, but I think it was more so to keep her mind off the divorce. The new house was small. A 3-bed, 1-bath with a dining room and a living room. We had a fenced-in backyard and a muddy lawn with an old tree sagging over it. It was the dead of winter, and as a 13-year-old girl going through her first of many depressive episodes to come, I submerged myself into the internet. I came home every day to an empty house, made myself a snack, and planted myself on the couch to get lost in a YouTube rabbit hole until my eyes hurt. We only lived in the house for a couple weeks, but I was beginning to adjust to a new life. Sure, I didn't like Windfall, but I wasn't afraid of our house. School was miserable, but I cherished my time to myself. I felt as if I was getting a small taste of the adult life 13-year-old me was so eager to have. I wasn't scared to be alone. Until I caught sight of him. Sometimes in my YouTube crusade I'd get distracted by the TV and my laptop screen would fall asleep. I'd look down and jiggle my mouse and get back to it. But this time, there was a small shape standing behind me, in the doorway of my mom's bedroom. Just a short apparition with noticeably spiked hair. He didn't move, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up straight and my skin began to break out in goosebumps. As quick as he appeared, he was gone. I hadn't turned to face him, but I knew in my heart it had to be a little boy. I wasn't afraid of him. The house was old and I felt that maybe he was just curious. I didn't get the feeling that he was bad or that maybe I should fear him. He just surprised me was all. It became normal to see him. Most times he was in the reflection of my screen. Other times, I'd look up and see him leaning against the doorway of the dining room. He was never in color. Only a black shadow that faded away as soon as I blinked. I didn't want to tell my sisters or my mom. I'd been getting horribly bullied at school nearly every day, and I felt if I were to say something, they'd make fun of me or simply call me crazy. I didn't want them to think I couldn't handle being alone. Either way, he was harmless. At first. Soon, he began to appear closer to me, or things in the house would fall over mysteriously. Cabinets would slam shut or the TV would turn off. Curtains would sway as if someone had run their hand through them. I'd just blare my headphones and stay put on the couch, staring at my laptop and praying that somebody, anybody, would come home. I'd see him and my face and palms would begin to sweat. I started to feel like maybe the curious spirit maybe wasn't so innocent. Like he was teasing me or pushing his limits to see just what he could do to instill fear in me. I'd never tried to talk to him or communicate, and quite honestly I had no interest in trying. The first time I ever saw him in detail, I was in my bed. My little sister and I shared a room and I had top bunk while she was on the bottom. I began to wake in the middle of the night, sweaty with my heart racing. Each night I'd look over the railing of my bed and see him standing in the dead center of my room, staring at my little sister as she slept. He could have only been 7 years old. He was skinny and he had a red plaid button-up shirt tucked into black pants. He had spiked, bleach blonde hair and pale blue eyes. What stuck out about him was how white his skin was. He looked nearly albino, yet his lips were a shade of deep purple. I'd be too afraid to close my eyes or to even breathe. I'd wake in the nights to come, holding my eyes shut because I knew when I opened them he'd be there. Some nights, My sister wouldn't be in her bed because she was still young enough to want to be in Mom's bed. He'd still just stand there, staring, not acknowledging me or letting it be known that he knew I was there. But I knew he knew. As I kept this secret, our household began to fall apart. My sisters and I were constantly fighting. My depression was worsening and self-harm crept into my daily life. My mother began to drink heavier, and in fits of rage or sadness she'd say things she didn't mean. She'd changed into a person filled with anger when she'd once been so loving and sweet. My family began to feel like strangers to me. This led to even more time in the house on my own as my sisters used their friends' houses as an escape. I had made no friends at my new school, so the only thing I could do to get away was to take walks to the gas station or to play with the dog the next door neighbors kept chained outside to a tree. Every time I'd see the little boy, I'd stop what I was doing and go sit with that dog. I'd stay put for a few hours until someone arrived home. Things hit their peak when it came time for me to bathe. I love baths, but for some reason when I took baths at this house, I felt nothing but anxiety. My chest would tighten and burn when I'd lay back to wash my hair, and I'd feel like I couldn't bring myself back up. I'd scream for my mother because I often felt paralyzed with fear. Even just looking at the bathtub gave me an uneasy feeling and sent my heartbeat banging through my ears. Eventually, my anxiety of baths evolved into a full-fledged fear of water. Swimming pools, baths, lakes, it's all ruined for me. When I think back on it, it never felt as if the house had a happiness to it. Only darkness and that same energy that Windfall emitted so strongly. I was overcome with relief when Mom let us know that she and my stepdad had worked things out and we'd be moving back home. I couldn't have gotten out of that house fast enough. The only thing I didn't want to leave behind was the neighbor's dog. I had learned to shove away those memories. The little boy's face still popped up in my dreams from time to time, but I'd gotten over my anxiety of being home alone. Mom got better and she eventually went back to being her old self again. Time passed and the depression got easier to manage. I'd nearly forgotten about him. We'd all been drinking around the bonfire one night, shooting the shit and talking about old memories. I was 20 now and felt that I could bring up the boy and handle whatever backlash I got from it. I asked my mom if she remembered the house and if she ever saw anything there. "Oh, for sure. That place was haunted as shit," were her exact words. "Yeah." My older sister chimed in. "There was a little boy there, but he was not a little boy." I felt my heart drop to my stomach. He was evil. I'd always see him running around the dining room table or standing in Mom's doorway. That's why I was always at Olivia's, because I hated that freaking house. She continued on. I told them my story. All of it. I told them why I'd suddenly become so afraid of water and why I hated being alone. It wasn't just him. There was an old woman there too. My mom said. She'd stand in the dining room and tell me to get out of her house. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and she'd be standing at the end of my bed staring at me, pissed as hell. That's why I get up in the middle of the night and grab your sister out of bed so she could sleep next to me, because I was so scared. The worst time it happened, I woke up and saw that boy sitting on my dresser, swinging his legs. He hopped off the dresser, walked to the side of my bed, and jumped at me. He jumped straight at me and then disappeared. Mom continued on. When we left, I looked up the house and turns out an old lady used to own that house and she died there. "What about the little boy?" I asked. "Yeah, a little boy died in the house back in the 70s. He drowned to death. Since leaving the house, I've returned to Windfall a handful of times to visit family. The energy is still there. That heaviness and otherworldliness. As years go on, more and more ghost stories emerge from Windfall and the people who've lived there. Native American spirits and little children. There's something about that place that falls just perfectly on a wave of paranormal possibility. It radiates with things I don't know if we as a species will ever be able to wrap our heads around. Windfall, Indiana exists, and so does everything else in it. Which story did you like best? Comment, like, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Until we meet again.